little warning. We are all going to die.
And there's no way of getting out of it.
But take a step back. As they say, use your time wisely.
Now, I'm not going to divulge too much into this. When it comes down to it,
The key is living in the moment.
A real joy to get to know you. Pim has been accepted to Quest University in Squamish, BC, Canada, where she plans to major in film and anthropology. Her Greenstone topic mixes the two. It's called The Human Tongue, Culture and Silent Film. Please welcome Pim.
Get a nose job. Now this is something my mom would tell you on the streets of Bangkok City, but no heads would be turned. So would you be offended, even though she had no intentions of hurting your feelings? If anything, she probably had the best of intentions. So how many times has it been where you've interacted with someone from a different culture as you, and they've done something or said something that you just don't quite understand? She raises her eyebrow. She's judging you. He slurps his soup too fast. The food wasn't satisfying. And if I were to ask you what your number one moral learned was while growing up, it'd probably depend on where you grew up or where your parents grew up. It could be to point with your lips instead of your fingers, to say those magic little words, or to even feel guilty while using the bathroom. Now, I've grown up in 2 countries, but been engulfed in 3 cultures, one of which belongs to my dear mother, Thai, one of which belongs to my dear father, American, and the one in which I'm currently standing in now, Balinese. I don't belong to any. And when I grew up, I'd wish that I had darker, longer hair and darker skin, just so when I walked down the streets, I wouldn't be stared at. And in school, they'd always tell me I was too skinny, but my mom's friends would always tell me I was too fat and cheeky, with no offense given, of course. And then in the States, I was always too timid. It wasn't until I finally moved to Bali that I met a group of people who had the same thoughts as me. Where's home for all of us? Where do we all belong, especially when we've lost the sense of culture? Why can't we just accept each other for who we are? So I've decided to explore all of this through one medium, with the same colors, the same sort of sounds, and the same sort of motives. Here is 2 minutes of culture and silent film. A 2-minute video I did trying to understand the culture of Bangkok. And I first started out this project with trying to know how a culture is formed. So a culture is formed when a specific group of ecological niches come together and form this adaptation around the environment. They then start sharing beliefs and symbols and have a normality in which you do something. In order to transfer all this information, you use language. And personally, I think to fully understand a culture, you need to fully understand the language. Of course, physical traits used to play a huge role in culture, but these days you can't really look at someone and know where they're from anymore. And something I've realized that people tend to overlook but all know is that you're never born with a culture. It's never inherited. It's always learned. So, most families bicker, and so did mine. But you could easily depict the reasons to my family's bickering was due to the different common values. I'd constantly have to listen to my mom rambling on to my dad about his flaws whilst he got offended. And I'd always be conflicted as to take sides with my mom or my dad. Usually, I'd be able to do this both really well simultaneously. Because I understood from my mom telling my dad to stop eating because you're getting too fat wasn't an offensive thing. But for my dad, growing up in a culture where commenting on your physical attributes could be rude, I could empathize. That's how I got so interested in learning about culture, because that was a clear definition of ethnocentrism, which is judging someone else's actions through the lens of your own culture. And I decided what a better medium to use than through a lens without ethnocentrism, a camera lens. So the reason why I love film so much is because the camera doesn't judge, like your next door neighbor. And the camera person, or the director, gets all the power. You get to choose the angle of the shots, the sounds, the music, and you get to show the audience your perception of things and see that reaction. Over my 4 years in green school, I've developed this passion for film. And I realized it's such an easy medium to show something when you're trying to explain something. That's why I decided to apply it to culture. But knowing and understanding a culture didn't happen when I pointed the camera at someone's face. It was the conversation I tried to have beforehand, attempted to have beforehand. It was the nod of the head or the curve of the lip. In itself, it was a silent language, the silent part of culture, like universal science that we all do and know, but it doesn't involve culture. Of course, gestures in itself have culture incorporated into it, but it has less boundaries to it. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little story about when I was working on this project. I walked into this cafe one day and I was sitting down, and there was this Indonesian man and this Swedish man sitting at the table next to me. And I was listening into their conversation, and it was a simple enough conversation on the topic of love. And at first I thought it was simple, but after the first hour of sitting there listening to them, I realized how not simple this conversation was. I got included into the conversation, and I remember the Swedish man telling us that love is like all different colors, and colors changed, and when your color changed, you could change your partner. It was that easy. But I remember the Indonesian man, he looked at us as he pushed 2 salt bottles next to each other and looked at us intently and told us that no, you could only have one partner in this whole lifetime. Regardless if you get angry, argue, beat them, just spend a little time away, come back, and it'll all be okay because there's only one. Love wasn't a simple merry-go-round of partners. And it was complete culture dissonance. But what bothered me wasn't the fact that the 2 of them had different opinions. What bothered me was that the 2 of them couldn't accept the other's opinions for what it was. So belonging. Everyone sitting in this room right now needs a sense of belonging, regardless to if it be your country, to your culture, to your friends, to your family. We all need it. It's primal to our well-being. Isolation and loneliness can actually lead to depression and can harm your well-being and lead to bad intellectual development. So what happens when a kid loses their sense of belonging in a culture? It can be a bit awkward, it can be a bit strange, but for me it wasn't too bad because I grew up in an international school and I always have. And we kind of had a silent community and a silent culture of ourselves, kids who didn't belong. So we kind of understood each other, but I'm worried about when we leave. Because I remember I had this friend whose mom was from Germany, dad was from India, and he had moved around 6 countries his entire life and hadn't stayed in more than one for 3. So you could see how answering the question, where are you from, can be a bit difficult. And I'm sure it's very difficult for the majority of kids in this room right now. But we need to understand that when we leave, it's okay to not have a culture identity, and it's okay to not be able to answer the question, where are you from? So there's this quote that's set from University of Michigan, 1999, that says, a psychological sense of belonging is greater predictor of major depression than other factors commonly associated with depression, such as social support, conflict, and loneliness. It helps us survive. There's good news though. National Geographic just recently stated that kids on playgrounds and college campuses are actually using terms such as Blackanese, Philippines, Chicanese, and Korean-Gishan to describe themselves. And even Obama thinks that by 2060 we'll be a pluralist nation and all look like this. So yeah, there are those kids though, that are called the chameleons. The ones that look like they belong somewhere on the outside, but on the inside they feel completely different. So, I'm not saying to completely get rid of culture. Culture in itself is surrounded by beautiful things. Beliefs, food, dances, ceremonies. It gives us more to explore, more to talk about. Because of acceptance. And I call this the human tongue, which is the understanding that we're all collectives of human society regardless of what you see on our faces or what our background is. And this is another video I did, but it's a mix of different cultures. That it was a mixture of cultures, which I thought was pretty interesting. But so as I went on with this project, I realized how similar people actually are. And of course, language can be a big boundary when you don't understand it and you're trying to be accepted. But through my lens, I realized and noticed how alike people do things. And people do the same things every single day. People eat, people fight, people communicate, cry, and love. And coming into the 21st century, it's almost impossible to get anywhere if you don't understand that there's a different communication system between you and someone who isn't raised as you were. And I've been told this before. Underneath it all, we're all a bunch of cells. And when it comes down to it, it's acceptance and tolerance. Whether it be to your morals sometimes, whether you don't understand someone's sexual orientation or like the color of their skin. Culture is just the same thing. We are a collective of the humankind, the same species, and we feel the same emotions and go through the same problems. Everyone understands a cry, and everyone understands a laugh. It's the human tongue, and we all know how to speak it. Thank you.
In the moment.